Anyway, start again. Welcome to episode 49 of Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Tonight's show is all about minimalism. Last week, on episode 48, I gave a wee bit of a talk about the notion of negative space and minimalism in photography. It's one of those topics that crops up periodically, and obviously with photography, as in all kinds of art, you can go in many different directions. You can get very complex, you can get very detailed, or you can strip things right back to their bare minimum, in which case you're moving towards minimalism. So having talked about that last week, I set a challenge, and we've actually had 20 people send in a variety of images, which we're going to look through this evening. Some people have asked for little bits of critique and insight or some opinion. Others are just sharing inspirations and thoughts behind the images that they did. So that's really tonight's minimalism challenge. We're going to be going through the images, and hopefully by the end of this you'll have a much better idea of what minimalism is and be inspired by some of your fellow photographers to go out and try some things yourself. So here we are live on Facebook. Leave a comment, let me know you're here. It's always lovely to know where in the world people are from, so if this is your first time here as well, let me know where you're dialing in from as well. Dialing in, that shows the age a bit, doesn't it? Where you're viewing from. I see we've got a few comments already, so let's do a quick. I've got a whole bunch of hellos. This is lovely. So Robert's howdy from Texas. Becca is saying good evening from Norfolk. Diana is good evening from Wales. Maggie is good evening from in the kitchen next door. Lucas says good evening. Ben says hello from Scotland. Nicola says good evening. Jim says hi Kim, Jim from Dumfries. Roy says hello everyone. Ingeborg's from Norway says hi. Sandra, hello everyone. I can see the comment section, but not Kim. Is that the same for everyone else? I think that was just right back at the beginning when I forgot to when I put the wrong screen on. Brian says hi all, good to be with you. Good to be with you. Jill says hello everyone. Maria, hi from South Africa. Ben says sounds okay to me. Oh, that's good because I'm still worrying the sound thing seems to keep flicking up into the red, but as long as that's all right. Rosie says good evening everyone from the Isle of Whithorn. Diana saying sounds good. Roy says sounds good. Sandra says I can see Kim now. Cool. Rosie says I turned the volume down as I was on 100%. Right. And Pat says if you make it to this summer, you must drill me on how to get the right video when I want it. Yes, okay. Well, I'm so glad you made it, Pat. Pat is watching from down in southern England. We're hoping that once I get past COVID and second injections and all the rest of it, then I'm going to be heading down south to catch up with family, at which point I'll catch up with you too, Pat. And then we can certainly have a little look through your computer and make sure you're clicking on the right video. It seems like you've done it anyway. Ben Benedito is here as well, saying evening Kim, evening all. So we've got two Bens in tonight. Cool, that's good. I've got got a good crew in, and a couple of new names and faces too. So welcome all. So minimalism then. I think there's been a couple of people who've put in into just very late today. Martin squeezed in an image and said, is this minimalism? I'll come to that one in a minute. We also had somebody else, suddenly slips my mind, Angela also posted, but it was at this point it was a bit too late to start sticking another image in. Sort of wondering about whether her image would fit under the category minimalism. And I think it's one of those things that on the one hand we know a good minimalist image when we see it. And, there are certain images where you just have no doubt that's minimalism. On the other, you have no doubt that that isn't minimalism. But there's this sort of fuzzy grey area where it's sort of minimalism, sort of isn't, heading in that direction. And where one person will draw the line isn't necessarily the same place where somebody else will draw the line. And I think we're certainly going to see some of that tonight, that there are some shots that we've got that are clearly very minimalistic and some which are less so, but still veering in that direction. I suppose if you're trying to think about a hard line of this is, this isn't, you're never really going to get that. So it's as much about what you decide. Well, it's what you decide for your pictures. If you're trying to stick your picture into a photo competition, certainly one of these online things like PhotoCrowd or Guru Shots or Viewbug or any of these, where there's a crowd vote, generally speaking, if you're going in for a minimalism contest, go all out as minimalism you can. Make sure that it does fit minimalism and you're not in the fuzzy grey area. The fuzzy grey area means that you will get a bunch of people who will turn their nose up at your photo. It doesn't matter how brilliantly it was taken, they just won't vote for it. But if you're not worrying about the crowd vote, then I think minimalism it's a really interesting topic. It's as much a mindset as how you approach photography as well. So we're going to look at these this evening. Oh, and Michelle's come in and says, hi Kim, good evening everyone. So welcome Michelle. So, okay, we've got quite a few photos to get through tonight. I'm not going to do a big critique on all of them. I will critique some of them where people have specifically asked, but mostly it's going to be hopefully about inspiration. Now, if you find this podcast useful, interesting, helpful, and would like to support it in any way, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is the place to go. It's not compulsory, but it is always appreciated. Okay, let's make a start. So the first photo then that I want to put up is, well, we'll start with Martin. And because quite straightforwardly, Martin put this one in this afternoon. It was a bit late, but his straightforward question, is this minimalist or not? And I thought, well, okay, it's a good start. The fact is, Martin wasn't really totally sure about whether it is or not. And there's complexity in it, but there's also a simplicity in it. And I think it's one of those things whereby there's a certain amount of you can decide that it is, or you can decide that maybe there's things you could do to make it slightly more minimalistic. So if you were wanting to, you might be quite happy with this photo as it is. If you were going to put it into one of those minimalism competitions, then what I would say is I would say go for a black background rather than a sort of slightly grey one and give it a little bit more space. So in this case, if what we were to do is, let's just take the curves and sort of drag, get a little bit more brightness, pull that down, and create more contrast. So really, what's interesting about this photo in minimalistic ways is the lines, it's the shapes. And if you create more contrast, and what I've done here is create this little kind of S-bend in the curves here. So the lights are a little bit lighter, more importantly the darks are a little bit darker. And that kind of creates this sort of black background. Then it becomes much more just about the shape itself. And then what I would be tempted to do is actually give it a little bit more negative space around it. So if you take a bit more space above, a little bit more space below, and it just gives it that little bit more room to breathe. So from that to that certainly moves it much more into a minimalist kind of feel for it. Now that's a very, very quick edit. You could create even more contrast within the depending on your original, what you've got here, but actually sort of in the little bits of bent wire of the barbed wire. So that's your kind of starting point. If you're wanting to make something, do a quick kind of more minimalist, then upping the contrast, creating more negative space, automatically starts moving you in that direction. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense there, Martin. Okay. Oh, Russ has come in from Thornbury in South Gloucestershire too. Hi, Russ. Sandra says that black background makes the photo more dramatic. And yeah, that's kind of it. The black then contrasted more with the white on that bit of barbed wire. And so the negative space of it sort of had more impact. And to go back to what we were talking about last week, which is negative space is the space around the subject. It isn't the subject, but it essentially gives the subject shape. Without the negative space, you wouldn't really be able to see it. If it was a very, very busy background, you'd be squinting to try and work out what it was you were looking at. And what we're going to be, part of what we're going to be looking at this evening is how much space can you give something before you kind of lose that sense or start to gain it. So let's move on to our next photo then. And this is from the first of our Bens, Ben Craven. Now, what I really quite like about it, Ben put this in and didn't really say much, just sort of, here's my picture for the minimalism bit. So I then asked him a sort of follow-up question, just sort of said, well, what was it about this that grabbed your attention? Really, what were you chasing? Because this is a really important part of photography, is every time you get your camera out, every time something grabs your attention and you start changing your position, working out your settings, pointing your lens at something, you've got something in mind. We don't always know what it is. There's something there that we start chasing. There's a kind of an itch we're trying to scratch. There's something we're really after. Now, the clearer we can be on what it is we're chasing, the easier it is then to get it. You know, if you know that it's about a particular line, if you know it's about a particular contrast or a shape or a juxtaposition between two different things, or a particular mood or flavour or colour or smell that you're really trying to capture, then that makes it a lot easier for you to decide what you're doing next. Now, when I asked Ben what he says, his reply it's quite long, but it's worth reading because I really liked it. He says, at the outset, I wasn't chasing anything. There are outside steps leading to our front door. And one morning last week, I noticed the rather lovely pattern of shadows on them from the uprights of the handrail. I thought it might be suitable material for the minimalist picture. Once I started having to make editing decisions, such as how many of the 4 steps in the original picture I would show, other thoughts came to me. One of my interests is in maths and geometry. Here we have 2 sets of planes at right angles, the risers and the treads at the tops of the steps, being intersected by a 3rd set of oblique planes, the shadows of the railing uprights. I also have an interest in vision. There are broadly 4 brightness levels in the picture, each of them as a result of whether the surface is horizontal or vertical, or whether it's in shadow or it's not. Somehow our brain is miraculously able to take all of these brightness differences and interpret them as a 3-dimensional scene instead of a flat surface with shades of paint on it. I increased the contrast to make it more ambiguous as to whether we were looking at a painted surface or an unpainted 3D partly shadowed scene. Finally, I tried to compose the picture so as to create some sort of symmetry in the place and in the places that the shadows enter and leave the frame. I like the energy that the bends in the central shadow give it, almost like a cartoon lightning flash. This time last night, I'd never had any of these thoughts. This is the first time I've created a photograph for its own sake. It's been very interesting. Well, I mean, I'm absolutely delighted that you decided to really give this a go, Ben. You know, that this isn't the way you normally have been approaching photography up until now, but you were looking for something, you saw something, you pursued it, and then when the editing is precisely that, what are you trying to do? And your interest in geometry, light, and lines, you've then found a way to express that through the picture. So thanks very much for sending that one in, Ben, and thanks also for giving that explanation, because you know, we can look and we can go, oh, there's an interesting set of lines, but to know your interest in light and geometry and maths and what have you really adds an extra layer to that, I think. Right. So, Naria's here. Hello, everyone. Sorry, just late back from work. All right. So you're doing the equivalent of walking into the classroom late, are you, Naria? Yeah, okay. So, Benedito says that the narrative of the image, as you would say. Yeah, cool. Yeah, so it's the storytelling, the narrative, the style, that's what you're really chasing. Okay, so next up we're going to go for Lucas. And now Lucas, I've just realised the key part of this scene you can't actually see. So, because my head's in the way here. So I'm going to have to shrink this down. Well, actually, let's just open it with Photoshop for a moment so that I can shrink it and move it a little bit. Okay, so what you're seeing here then is, see there's a little figure. Let's zoom in on the figure so you've got a sense of what's going on. So we have this figure on a beach, could be a boat or something in the background there, but everything has become, apart from the figure, everything is sort of faint and blurry and sort of melds into each other. And Lucas says, hi all, been absent for some time. That's true, not seen you for a few weeks. It says, due to injury. Right, well, I hope you're feeling a bit better from that, Lucas. I'm not sure quite what you did, what was wrong, but, injury is never good, so I hope you're on the road to recovery. Anyway, he goes on to say, minimalism is a bit like high-key photography, mysterious and undiscovered. And I thought this photo would maybe fit the subject well. Taken a long time ago in the Philippines, converted to black and white. And there's nothing much in the photo. And no, by and large there isn't. It is minimal. But what makes it then is the person. And, because quite simply, I mean, if you take that person out, that's a point where you go, well, it's minimalism, but so what? Whereas when we have the person in it, it's the person who anchors it, and all that space is around. And now we know we've got this person in this large space. We start to ask questions about the person. We start to wonder what he's doing there, what he's feeling, or he's creating a mood. Maybe we identify as a sort of lone person in this large open space. So it's that idea of going beyond just what you immediately see to try and evoke some kind of response in the viewer, and ideally a response which is more than next. And so it is one of those things whereby when you're attempting minimalism, that just as at one end of it, you've got, it's not minimalist enough, it's maybe too complicated, people might argue with you as to whether it falls into that category or not. And at the other end, you can get to the point whereby, well, so what? You could do just a completely white image. That's minimalist. You can't get any more minimalist than that. But then it's a so what? So it's about trying to find the right balance. It's about finding a point of interest that's really going to grab the attention and keep the attention. So, thanks for sending that one in, Lucas. Okay, yeah. As Maggie's commenting on that one, it says, such a strong sense of solitude, maybe loneliness, very atmospheric. Yeah, and I think it is. The more space you have around, the more it creates that feeling. But of course, you also have to, create so much space that you can't make out the figure. At that point, you lose it as well. So it's always about trying to find the right balance. How much negative space do you use to maximize the feeling without going too far that you actually swamp the original idea? Pat says, looks like something's caught his attention. Yeah, it's true. He's looking straight out to sea. So it could have noticed something, or maybe he's just kind of lost in thought, listening to the sound of the waves. And of course, that's me projecting. So there's nothing more wonderful than standing on the edge of a beach, listening to the sound of the sea. Right. Okay, Lucas says, I'm not sure if something caught his attention. He was alone. Right, yes. Okay, cool. Right, okay, next image then is from Ingeborg, who in Norway. And so this is your first time here. Welcome, Ingeborg, and submitted an image as well, which I thought was, yeah, now this is a lovely, moody, fog is always a great one to play with, because when you've got that kind of really grey day and you've got water, and calm water as well, then the reflection of the greyness of the fog just blends into the water, and you can't see the horizon. You've got no idea where the water ends, where the fog begins. And that's unusual to the way we're used to seeing horizon lines. So when we can't, it's quite eerie, it's quite strange, and then of course sounds become more muffled in fog as well, so it's a very different experience. And then when you've got something like this, now what we've got here is on a kind of raft. Actually, what Ingeborg says, was out on a really foggy day. Only some very contrasting elements were visible. The fog kind of enhances a loneliness, a vulnerability. As for the floating raft, I wish I could have caught the little bird in the water a bit clearer though. So yes, we've got the little bird over here, and I would actually say I'm working on the idea of your name being pronounced Ingeborg. If it's not, please put in the comments how you would say it. So yes, I think that little bird actually really does add something to the picture. The only thing I would tend to feel with this is I kind of want to make it a little bit more cinematic in shape. Obviously, this is entirely your choice, but within this, I think whether I narrowed that down a bit, or maybe even widened this a little bit. I'll just use the content aware so we carry on getting that fog effect. And it also gives a little bit more space for that bird on the left. And I think, yeah. So we compare that to that. Does it a bit more for me, I think. It does that. Maybe it's the slightly more, that slightly more cinematic feel. It doesn't feel quite as closed in. I think because the bird was sort of pushing in towards the edge of the frame, you kind of feel like you're coming to the edge of it. Whereas I think part of the wonder of the fog is just that sort of vast openness that you get, and so creating a little bit more space around it, I think, just really emphasises that a little bit more. But it's a lovely photo, really lovely, very, very deep and moody, and you can kind of hear or almost smell the silence there. And okay, so Ingeborg says it's fine, or Inga is easier. Oh well, if you're fine being called Inga, I'll go for Inga. If Maggie says, love that reflection, is wavy, not still, and Ben likes the wider version as well. So actually, let's just do a quick little zoom in on that reflection, because it is a lovely reflection, I think. I mean, the water we know is very calm, but it's not absolute calm. There is the wiggle of the reflection there. Right, okay. Where else are we then? Yes, Sandra also thinks it looks better wider, as does Michelle and Jill. So there you go, Inga, you've been outvoted. Cool, okay, right, so next up then, we've got Jim. Now, Jim sent me 3 different photos, but given the fact that actually I had about, in total, I think there's probably something like about 35 photos sent in, and we will be here till midnight if I go through all of them. I'm just going to drop it down to one of Jim's. So I asked him actually which was his favourite out of the ones he sent me, and this was his one. So Jim says, my personal favourite is the wine bottle, as it was the most challenging. I was going to go for a long depth feel, but it ended up being slightly shallower, which I quite like. The bottle and the end of the bench is the bit that's in focus. So as it, it goes out of focus a little bit as you head out towards the hills, beyond the water, beyond the sea. So this is one of those where I think, unlike, say, Inger's or Lucas's, which were, there's a lot of stuff where, large areas of space where is very minimal, lots of negative space. The negative space in this isn't that negative. The grass in the foreground is very textured, so is the sea. We've got layers, we've got clouds, mountain range in the back, or hills in the background. And yet, we've also got the wine bottle, and really this is about the wine bottle in the setting. Now, I did then go on to ask Jim whether, in the original photo, whether, because it says it's Jacob's Creek Merlot, I think, on the bottle. So I thought, actually, if given that it looks like a fairly dull day, most of the colours would naturally be fairly desaturated. If you had the red wine in that, the red would actually kind of really stand out. But anyway, he said no, it was an empty wine bottle. So that wasn't one to explore. But I think, there's that idea of sort of creating, the focus is about the wine bottle, and then because you've got that kind of relatively empty background, I mean, there aren't people in there aren't boats in there, there isn't a plane flying past, there's nothing else other than the nature. So the wine bottle in itself then becomes very much a focus, and you can start to build narrative, if you wish, around the fact that that's the man-made bit, sitting on a man-made bench, sitting within nature. I think when I talked about the idea of the fuzzy lines of minimalism, that this sort of moves into that, in the sense that if you were to do a minimalism contest, there would be some people who would feel that the background was too busy for that. I think you're kind of just in the right side of the line, I think it's as much, this is where it's where your approach is minimalism. Your approach is the idea of, let's strip this back, let's take out whatever's unnecessary in this, which is a good way of kind of approaching photos, which is what, if there are other things which aren't contributing to the narrative, they shouldn't be in there, and strip it back to the essentials. So thanks for sending that one in. Where are we at? Okay, so Inga says thanks, and Rosie replying to Inga says she loves the bird. And Rosie also says, I would love to be sitting on that bench looking across at that view with the wine. Yes, actually, I think at this point you would want to have the wine in the bottle, not the empty bottle. Michelle is offering up the idea, she thinks it needs a wine glass to complete the story. Okay, yeah. I suppose there's also a thing here, which is what wine you're using. You've got a Merlot there. Would it be different if it was a bottle of Buckfast? Yes, there's all sorts of stories that can come in just in the kind of bottle that you decide to use. VG's joined us. Says hi everyone. It's okay, VG. Not done your picture yet. So okay, what we're going to do now is move on to Sandra. Wrong one. And so Sandra says, I wasn't able to take any new photos this weekend, so I've submitted an old one. Well, you see, I wouldn't have known. You could have told me you took this one just at the weekend. I wouldn't have known. So this one, again, there's much more in the way of texture. There's texture in the water, there's texture in the sky, there's the lovely kind of reflection of the sun sparkling on the water. And I must say, I love the reflection of the boat and sail on that as well. So yes, it's that this is sort of, again, it's not that smoothed out total black, total white, or very little texture kind of background. It's a much kind of busier thing, but it is still got that minimalist feel. There's the emptiness around the boat. I like the fact that you've got, that kind of rule of thirds. You've got more sea in there, which is allowing for the reflection of the light. And while there are obviously ripples on the sea, it's obviously also a very calm day. So there is a sense of stillness, there is a sense, while at the same time having a sense of movement, because you've got the sail up on the boat. But I think it's a very calming photo. But I think also with the calming side of that is what we've talked about before about the difference between horizontal and diagonal lines, is that if you've got strong horizontal and vertical lines, they kind of create a stability and a calmness to a picture. If you've got diagonals in, they end up creating much more of an energy and a movement. And if that sail was sitting at a diagonal, or the boat was tilted over and also the reflection was then creating a V, then you would have much more of a sense of energy and movement within it. But because it's a very slight curve in it, but basically because it's sort of sitting upright, that's adding, and that very strong horizon line is adding to the calmness and stability of it. So thank you for that, Sandra. Pat says, beautiful. Maggie says, love the figure in the boat. Escape. And Fiji says, beautiful shot, calm waters. Yeah, escape. Yes, I think that there has been this past... One of the things I noticed with COVID and the lockdown, we all go through different stages of hitting a wall. Every now and again, it just sort of becomes big and overwhelming and can really kind of drag you down. And I had this past week or so, I've kind of been struggling with this. My mood's lifted today, which is nice. But that notion of escape, I think that is really feeling these big openings. I suppose it's like that one with Lucas of the man standing on the beach as well. I just sort of yearn for that kind of thing. So yeah, nice to see a little bit of escapism. Okay, Jim says, thanks Kim, we'll use the full bottle next time. I might even consider a glass as suggested by Michelle. Great, so good, there you go. Getting your ideas are being taken on board, Michelle. Roy says, do you think a vignette would help? Over which one? What with the... well, I'm guessing you're probably talking about Sandra's one. Possibly. Let's take a quick look again. It looks like, well, there is almost a kind of a bit of vignette anyway. It's sort of dark around the corners. You could add a little bit more in the sky. I don't know that if it's really necessary, and I'm not sure that it actually would, because again, I think part of this photo is you're wanting the freedom. The emptiness around it is part of it. You want to feel that sea kind of goes on forever in whatever direction. I think if you started vignetting this one, it would contain it a little bit too much, and it would certainly draw more attention to the boat and the reflection, but it would sort of create an edging which would stop you kind of moving out with. There is an idea with photos of sometimes you kind of create curves and barriers to keep the eye circling back within the photo. But I think when you're kind of doing something with minimalism and negative space, and you're trying to give the impression of there being more space than there actually is within the photo, at that point I think the vignette would actually impede what you're trying to do. So a really interesting thought, that, Roy. Thanks for that point. Right, okay, so Jill says, I want to escape to Dumfries and Galloway. Yes, that's this corner of Scotland in which I'm broadcasting from. It is a beautiful part of the country. Okay, so next one then, Rosie. Rosie says, just a quick grab shot taken today, and the quality is awful, but I do like the effect of the dog appearing from behind the hill. No, not that one. Again, let's hit the... yep, there we go. Oh, and that's shot back. So yes, Rosie says, yeah, quick grab shot, but I like the effect of the dog appearing behind the hill. I wish I just had more notice of the ISO at 2,500. That's a very high ISO. But at the same time, a 600mm lens, aperture priority, handheld. Okay, if you've got a 600mm lens, that's a very, very long lens. That's picking out craters on the moon kind of lens. And the problem that you have with that is the long lens will exaggerate any movement, and if you've got a slight wobble with your hand, then the far end of the lens is going to be exaggerated much more. I've used this example before, but for those who haven't seen it, it's like if I take a pen, just take this pen here, and a little bit of movement down at this end creates a very big movement at this end. And so if you're zooming in with a long lens, just the slightest of shake becomes massively exaggerated, so it blurs much more quickly. So the longer your lens, the more you're zoomed in, the higher the shutter speed you need to have in order to make sure that it doesn't become blurred. And if you're really going up a very high shutter speed, then something else has to give. Now, you've got this on aperture priority, so the camera will have gone, the auto settings would have said, right, okay, long lens, aperture priority, I've got to make sure I have a very high shutter speed. And in order to balance that out, it's giving you a high ISO to let the same amount of light in. Probably you'd notice that if you blow it up. Here on the web, you can't really tell the difference. You can get away with it. But yeah, no, to go back then to the actual subject, dog in a field, yep, it's fun. I see what you mean about it, sort of just being behind the ridge of the hill. You get that sort of the blurred out background, to get a sense of it being outside. And there's not a lot around. Again, a little bit like Inga's one, I really would be kind of tempted to just stretch that out a little bit more, give it a little bit more space. I mean, almost identical to Inga's, really. Just, you know, again, you could make it slightly more cinematic, or just actually a little bit more up on the top, something like that. And there you go. I think as a ratio, that maybe gives it a slightly more interesting. But it's a balance, as I keep saying. It's a balance to how much you want to put in, and where comes the point where you go, actually, there's just too much space and it's now overpowering the subject. But worth playing with anyway. So thanks for sending that one in, Rosie. Right. All right, yes, you've got plenty of, Nuria loves the dog, VG loves the dog, Pat wonders what the dog's looking at, Sandra, lovely dog, Jill loved the dog's expression and direction of the gaze. Yeah, so I think as soon as you go dogs, cats, babies, you automatically get vast improvement in numbers of people who are joining in and telling you how lovely it is. Becca says he looks ready to charge, lovely, and VG says yes, the space helps. Cool. Okay, next up we've got Rosie says thanks. Cool, thanks. We've got Nuria, and Nuria says here are a couple of photos I took a couple of days ago for the Minimalism challenge. Reason I use these is because I love wildlife and flowers. To be honest, anything to do with nature. I just happened to be out for a walk. It was a lovely sunny day, and here was a robin sitting on the fence. I know it's not completely in focus, as I had to be rather quick, as you do. Loved the way the sun was shining on him. And then the next picture she's got is a flower. It says, as for the flower, I just love the colour and it was feeling kind of lonely. Any critique, like composition or framing or whatever, much appreciated. So, what I would say with this, great, you catch the robin. It's quite strange. It looks quite different from the robins. I'm kind of used to a sort of slightly rounder robin and maybe a sort of slightly higher forehead. I don't know whether it's just the angle it's at. The kind of thinner, low foreheaded robin, this one, compared to the ones maybe that we've got in our garden. You've caught it quickly. I think quite simply, in terms of framing for this, Nuria, I'd really be tempted to go rule of thirds, and again, to give yourself that little bit more space, by stretching it. So if you kind of come in here but then come out here, so you can see that what we've got is, and again you could do slightly similar, if we sort of do something like that. So really we've got the head of the robin in that point on the rule of thirds kind of part of it ish. And there, do you see that sort of gives it that little bit more sense of a space around it. Maybe I've gone slightly too far, I'm not sure, but I think you get the sense of what I mean. Maybe just pull him in this way a little bit. Yeah, I think that feels slightly better to me. But if you're going down, again, if you're trying to chase that minimalism idea, you want to have a bit more space around it. I mean, the simple fact is if if it's just about the robin, you can crop in like this, in which case you're not worrying about minimalism, you're not worrying about negative space. What it's all about is the robin and how close you can get into the robin. But you weren't doing that, you would kind of create a sense of space around it. So it's not just the robin, it's the robin in its environment, in which case having a bit more space around it becomes quite important. Your other photo, which was the again, there's a little sort of sense of wanting a bit, it feels quite tucked up over on the left there, a little bit more space on the left I think would be quite nice, and again maybe slightly more landscape, a little bit more of a kind of cinematic crop to it I think would work quite well. Question is, I suppose, is it minimalism? I think this is getting harder to be minimalism because the grass itself is very busy. There's a lot of texture in it, there's leaves within it, there's a lot in the flower as well. If this was a much narrower depth of focus, if you had a very wide aperture and just part of the flower was in focus and the rest was blurring out, I think then you kind of could sort of be moving into a more minimalist thing. But I hope that, anyway, I hope that gives you a couple of ideas to play with there, Nuria. Okay, oh, Pat's saying, yes, our robins are also chubbier. It seems like you found the skinny robin in their country. Rosie says she was watching my son's dog walking with us and seemed to be checking to see if we were worth any attention. She obviously didn't think we were, she then walked away. And Sandra thinks the rule of thirds worked really well on the robin. Okay, excellent. So next up, Roy. Now Roy sent me two. I'm kind of again running for time, so I'll just use the one, but I did like this one. Again, actually part of the key of this is now stuck behind my head, so I'll just open that in Photoshop so I can shrink it a little bit more. Okay, let's close some of close these ones from Inga, Rosie and Nuria. So if I pull back here, what you can see is essentially we've got the wall and then we've got a single plant, looks like a nettle, growing out of the wall and casting this lovely little kind of diagonal shadow over on the right. And Roy says, here's the photograph of the Minimalism Challenge, taken specifically, not from my files. So again, impressed. I'm always impressed when somebody decides that they're actually going to go out and try and take a specific photo for the challenge. Obviously we can't all do that. Either we don't have time or we can't get out to the places that we would like to get out to, in which case there's nothing wrong with going and raiding your folders. As a few other people have as well. Now with this one, I like the plant and I love the shadow. I love that diagonal shadow. That's really cool. Now you've given it a lot of space in here. Let's just kind of pull back here so you can get a sense of the ratio. And there are quite some nice sort of patterns on the wall, but I think I can't help but feel like there's maybe too much space around this one, Roy. That it's that I think it's a case because the background isn't completely plain, because it is stonework, there's lots of texture, there's the lines of the bricks, there's the kind of the the lichens and the mold and the dark patches and what have you. It's actually a very, very busy background, and as such there's a lot drawing our attention away from this bit, which is actually what it's really about. And I kind of feel, well, if I sort of pull down to something like this actually I think gives me a slightly better ratio. So I'm much more tempted to just sort of, whilst normally I'm talking to people about giving it more space, in your case I'm actually very tempted to sort of say give it less. And if we do something like that, in fact actually maybe what would even be nice to stretch that a little bit more so that your plant is playing around on a kind of rule of thirds ish. And then do you see here, Roy, that now we've got a little bit of room on the left. This diagonal of the shadow runs up to that top right corner, and that creates a real. If you've got a diagonal, if you can get a diagonal running towards a corner, it always feels much stronger than if it's just sort of just missing the corner. And I think there's something really quite lovely about that. Now it still has a minimalist feel because it's not, but it's not being overpowered by the background. I think this kind of ratio probably gives you as much background as you need without, you know, kind of squashing the intent of it. But but yeah, I can see why this grabs your attention. Lovely to get that nettle there, and then you know, just growing out of that little tiny gap in the wall, and then a fantastic shadow that's coming out from it. Really lovely photo. No, that wasn't quite what I meant to do. That's what I meant to do. So thanks for that, Roy. Okay, so a couple of comments. Okay, Naria says, thank you, rule of thirds works well. It very often does. Now, there's plenty of times when it doesn't, but quite often, if you're not sure, try it. When you're playing with cropping, rule of thirds is quite often your first go-to. If you do it and it's not working, that's fine, abandon it, try other things. Try square crops, try cinematic crops, try portrait crops. But quite often it's a good starting point. What else have we got? Maggie says, love the texture of the wall. Becca says the gradient is interesting. Yes, so it's sort of moving from light to dark as it went across the picture. Ben says the shadow has much more punch now. I think that must be when I've cropped in. Yeah, Russ also says I like the crop much more, has more punch, and more pleasing on the eye. And Sandra is agreeing that the cropping works well. So yeah, there you go, Roy. I think that it is that thing of, again, all the way through this, I'm going to keep coming back to it, and that's what we're learning about this, is we're trying to find that balance between giving it enough. You know, some of these pictures I've given more space to, with yours less, because the background just became too overpowering. And removing that allowed the key elements to stand out a bit more on their own. Excellent. Okay. So next up, we're coming to Michelle. So Michelle put in this one and said, hi Kim, this was a complete accident while out walking one day. It seems to do well in minimalist challenges. Look forward to hearing your thoughts. And so what we've got here is this lovely grass, really, just a sort of lone grass, which I'm guessing from the camera settings you've got the lights hitting it, and so you've taken it at quite a fast shutter speed, and only that's lit up and everything else sort of dropped down into the darkness. And it's beautiful lines, beautiful textures, and then surrounded by the blackness. That's what kind of makes it minimalist. But I think here, to be honest, Michelle, very much like we've just been talking about with the others, I'm not completely convinced by the central, having it sitting smack bang in the middle. It feels like there's too much space at the top, and it feels a little bit too central. Now, there are certainly times when having the subject in the middle really works. And certainly if you're going for a more symmetrical or slightly asymmetrical kind of look, then I think that can work well. This, though, with its curve over to the right, again sort of draws me back to that rule of thirds idea, where if we were to just take this and create something like this, I think. And now I think, you know, we have a little bit of room to the left of it, but not as much as there was. That gives us more room to the right of it, which because it's leaning to the right, it's then kind of leaning into that space, and that space kind of feels like it's there more. I think in your original crop, it's just sort of, you've got the picture, and then you've got the blackness. So you've got the plant, and then you've got the blackness around it, and the blackness is there, but it's not doing anything. But I think if you crop it like that you kind of get more of a feeling of that space is there for a reason. It's leaning into it. Now it looks like there might even be a little bit of texture in the background that hasn't been lost completely. If I just grab the curves, drag that up, you can see that there's other bits of texture, but whether you'd want to get rid of that or not, I don't know. But I just think that crop works a little bit better. It still has a very minimalist feel to it because it's surrounded by plenty of empty space, but I think that space works for it a little bit better. I think it really kind of draws your attention more nicely to the plant without feeling like it's overwhelming the plant. So thanks for sending that in, Michelle, and I hope that was a useful idea. So Nuria says it does stand out more. I've missed a couple here. Where do we go? Okay, so Ben says the grass is looking to the right, so better with the space to look into. Sandra says rule of thirds works well on this one as well. Nuria does stand out more, and Michelle says looks so much better cropped that way, thank you. And Inga's replying to Ben there about how we tend to read photos from left to right as well. Yeah, that's one of those things that I keep wondering about, and I've still not yet had a decent answer from anybody. That we do tend to read photos left to right, but is that a Western bias? If you grew up reading Hebrew or Arabic, do you naturally read from right to left? And if so, does that affect the way that when you look at pictures, would you read from right to left rather than the other way around? So if anybody's ever actually got an answer for me on that, I would be really interested to know. Okay, next up then, Benedito, also known as Ben. Now, Ben sent in a few last week. I'm just going to pick out two of them. And right, where do we go? Click on that. So this one, Ben says, a minimalist landscape at Petworth House on a misty morning. So again, lovely bit of mist. And mist is, great for sort of allowing for that real minimalism feel. It just sort of creates very gentle gradients in the sky. There's no harsh lines. Says in the bottom right, you can just make out a walker. Not in the bottom left, I think, actually. Yeah, I often get that left and right bit mixed up, but there's just a little figures down here, which I really like. They add to that sense of scale, the sort of vastness of the sky, and even the size of these trees as well. So there's hints of landscape standing out in the mist. Now, Ben goes on to say, I bracketed this shot as I didn't know which shutter speed would give me the feel I was looking for. This was the middle shot, so I was good this time. But in mist and fog, worth doing a bracket as the camera brain is working to get the balance can be tricky in these conditions. Now, this is a really good point, and thank you, Ben, for bringing this up, because I don't think it's actually something I've discussed before. And it is worth talking about that, because a lot of cameras give you the ability to bracket. And what bracketing essentially is it allows you to take more than one photo at different exposures. So you can underexpose, mid-range expose, overexpose, and then depending on your camera, sometimes whether you do it, some cameras allow to sort of do it in camera, it can combine all of them together, or in your editing software you can also combine them together. So what it means is you can take the shadows from the overexposed bit, so which now look quite normal. You can take the highlights from the underexposed bit, which look quite good, and combine them with the mid-ranges, and so you end up with a lot more detail all the way through. But you're not going for a lot of detail in this. But the big problem that you have with fog, you'll find a very similar thing if you're trying to shoot snow, is that the camera doesn't always know what to latch onto, and will often, its auto exposure will make things too bright or too dark. It's not totally sure what it's supposed to be doing. And if you don't have time to necessarily sort of stand there and work it all out, if you use the settings to do bracketing shots, it will essentially shoot, and you can set it for whether it's 3 photos or 5 photos. And it will take its mid-range and it will overexpose by however many stops, and then it will underexpose by however many stops. And what it does mean is when you get back, you can look at the photos and you can say, actually, it wasn't the mid-range one, maybe it was the overexposed, or maybe it was the underexposed one that has actually worked best on this occasion. So it means you're less likely to sort of get back and realise that you wasted a shot or missed an opportunity. You know, you've been in this lovely situation and you get back to find that the photos weren't as good as you wanted. So it's a kind of giving you like a little kind of fail-safe thing. So learning a little bit more about bracketing your images. If you've got a manual for your camera, look up in the index bracketing, you'll find out whether it allows you to do it. Failing that, YouTube, there will be 10,000 tutorials on your particular camera on how to achieve it. So thanks for that, Ben. That's a really, really good point. The other picture Ben sent in, actually, I'll tell you what, let's just flick back, just see if there was any comments on that. Inga's saying it's a very intriguing theme. Yes. Okay, Sandra loves the image. Russ says, beautiful shot, Ben, stunning. Oh, Lucas has got to go. Okay, well, thanks for turning up, Lucas. You can watch the rest on catch up. Michelle loves the misty day, good shot. And Roy says, lovely picture. I think the narrative at the base attracts the eye too much. Well, I guess what you're meaning there is do you mean like Ben's writing on that? Well, yeah, that's true. We're trying to look at the photo. I'm presuming that's one that Ben had already got set up for a print, and it was the easiest one to put in. So where are we? So not that. Yeah. So the second photo Ben sent was this one, and he said, the image here using negative space to create scale and contrast in that scale. So the moon is so low that it appears large, and the ship is small by comparison. I feel the gap between the two is needed. It allows each of the subjects to breathe. The image was taken, an image taken a few minutes earlier seemed cluttered to me, whereas this one conveyed the story in a more tranquil way, adding mood to the image. So amazing colours, that sort of deep purplish, pinkish sky. Moon fairly low in the sky. The boat looks absolutely tiny, so if I just zoom in here, you can see that. And then there's quite deliberately, space between the two of them to create that sense of sort of scale, and it changes the relationship somewhat. And part of the reason I wanted to show this one is because it's by comparison to the next one, which is by Nicola. So this was Nicola's shot, which is not the moon, it's the sun. And Nicola says, hi Kim, I've finally taken the plunge and joined in at last. So I know Nicola's been watching these podcasts for quite some time now, but has never quite felt she ready to stick a photo in, but she has this time, so I'm really pleased you have, Nicola. Thank you. So she says, this is a shot I took from the house 3 years ago on the hill. Sorry, this is a shot I took from 3 years ago of the hillside above our house. I'm submitting this as a minimalistic as I like it. I like the barren atmosphere nature of it. The hazy sunlight gives it a strange and interesting feel. Also, it's been heavily cropped, and I've taken out a bit of the clutter. Keen to hear your thoughts, and if it can work any harder, as after having simplified it, I feel that now maybe there's something missing. I'll send you through the original. So she did send me the original. This was the original, and so there's bits of space here. There's maybe not needing some of this stuff on the left, and of course there's a telegraph pole with a wire running through the middle of it as well. So that's obviously been taken out. So when Nicola cropped it, she started to crop this and to take out the wire, the electric wires from it. But I think you're right. I think really this is one of those where it's just been kind of cropped in a little bit too close. And if we go to, let's just open this in Photoshop, and I think it's just a case of playing with the crop a little bit more. So your crop was in, you kind of come really up close to the tree, but I think if you came out from the tree, now there's another, you could do it square, something like that. If you've got a square crop like that, then essentially the sun is occupying one part of your rule of thirds cross, and your tree is taking the other. So that kind of works. Alternatively, again, there's a sense of you could maybe go a little bit more cinematic. If you kind of bring that down a bit, and there's a lot of below the tree you don't really need. You could take that to there. Now, what I really want is to then move this over a bit, and I think if I kind of pull this over, something like that, maybe pull that in a bit there, take that out. It's going to still keep that there-ish. Should have done that again with the content aware. I've forgotten I'd actually taken that off. So let's just try that again. Take that up to there, take that, bring that down a bit like that, and then just stretch it out a little bit. Something like that. Yep, got the content aware. And now I think that creates a slightly more interesting, whether you still want to have the telegraph pole in it or not, maybe it's not sure, but you could take that out. Yeah, I think you're better without it. And then you've obviously removed the, okay, that's not doing a very good removal. We'll leave that for the moment. I think that kind of works better for you, Nicola. I don't know, I'm like I say, I think the square could work, but for my taste, again, I like that sort of slightly more landscape feel to it, because it is a landscape, because you do have that tree, and because you do have that sun. And I must admit, I'm kind of quite blown away as well by just how big the sun is in comparison. But again, I chatted to you, and you've got this really long zoom on a bridge camera you were using, which has got the kind of stretched sort of zoom in that you just can't get for a DSLR, not without paying tens of thousands of pounds. I must admit, I'm quite often slightly tempted by the idea of getting one of these bridge cameras which has one of these sort of 60 times zoom on them, just so you can really get in and get close, because you try to get a 60 times zoom for a DSLR, I dread to think how much it would cost. You'd just be cheaper going out and buying a telescope and fitting it, I think. But yeah, back to that one, Nicola. I think that's really it's that kind of crop I think tends to work a little bit more. So, it's a lovely photo. It's really moody and really kind of grabs the attention. So your crop there, I think because you're so close in at the side here, it's creating it just kind of feels a bit too squashed in. Whereas I think when you've got that little bit more room to breathe around it, as in that, I think it then manages to emphasize that kind of loneliness of the tree and still that kind of, but also it's sort of almost like it's looking up, reaching up to that really dominant sun. So it kind of quite a powerful image, that I really do like it. So thank you very much for sending that one in, Nicola. Okay, what else? What comments have we got here? So Roy says, lovely pic. Oh no, that's dunk. Okay, so Pat says, well done, Nicola. Michelle says, I really love this photo. It looks really magical. Jill, beautiful image. Russ, beautiful shot, Nicola. Oh, April's joined us. Hi, April. Just got back from work. Hi, everyone. So, yep, you can watch the... I will just point out at this point then that up here, youtube.com/Kim Ayres. You can find all the past episodes all tidily edited up. And one of the things I am aware of sometimes with the Facebook, as it's going out live, the quality of the image isn't always there at the other end as it's streaming live. I'm recording it directly from my computer, so my recording of it, the quality tends to be slightly better. So when I put it up on YouTube, the YouTube versions are slightly better. It was also, the other advantage of going to the YouTube is that here on Facebook, you know, if you want to try and find past videos, you kind of have to keep scrolling back for a while, whereas on YouTube it's much more easy to sort of get to and spot them. So if you do go to YouTube, do make sure you subscribe and follow as well, and click the little bell for notifications. And I suppose another quick plug that if you are finding these interesting, useful, entertaining, or whatever, then do consider supporting the podcast by buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. So yeah, anyway, April. You can always catch up at the beginning later. So yeah, Roy says that format looks good. VG, very beautiful shot, great capture, Nicola. Nuria says, I love the shot, Nicola. Don't know why, but the hazy sun reminds me of sandstorms. Okay, and that's why it looks magical, as Michelle said. Becca says it's a lovely photo. Rosie says the telegraph poles and wires are the bane of my life. They seem to be everywhere in Dumfries and Galloway countryside. The sun and the tree are lovely. I do like the extra space around them. Oh, and Nicola says, thank you, Kim. That's really helpful. I'm glad. Thank you. But yes, it's true. I mean, I think this is one of those things whereby it just goes to show you how different we see things to the way the camera sees things. Though we've lost count of the number of times you see this most amazing view and you take a photo of the most amazing view and you get back and you find telegraph wires running straight through the middle of it, which you did not see. You know, your brain filters it out because it's unimportant. The camera doesn't filter it out. You have to filter it out in Photoshop or your editing program later. So yes, I absolutely agree with you there, Rosie. Right, okay, next up we have Diana. Now Diana says, here is my submission. Okay, let's go and find Diana's picture. So Diana's picture says, here's my submission for minimalism. I like the ridges on this otherwise plain bowl. I used a fast shutter speed with a wide aperture and a flash to get the black background. So yeah, this is keeping it really simple. There's nothing in here except the bowl, or even half the bowl, and the reflection underneath it. And I think that's, yes, and the ridges kind of just add this lovely kind of texture to it. It does look like there are a few kind of little dots here in the background, like you're picking up on something. Perhaps in post-production, perhaps in the editing, you could remove them. There is also a little sense, I just want to try, I didn't try this earlier, I'm just kind of curious now as to what would happen if we gave it a little bit more this way. Again, I mean, it's a square crop and you're absolutely welcome to keep it as a square crop, but does that add more to it? I'm not sure, maybe I've gone too far. It's a tricky one. You know, I suppose if you were doing that, you would maybe bring that one down a little bit lower as well. Maybe it's too much. I think it is too much now. Okay, let's just go back to open it. Yeah, probably better off with your square crop. Always worth playing with though, as to whether I think what it is. I know what it is. It's this diagonal. Okay, let me just quickly grab a pencil tool. This diagonal here sort of takes you to there, and it's just missing this corner, and I just want that diagonal to get into that corner up there. So I think really, even though it's a square crop, I just want to nudge this way just a little bit. And yeah, I think maybe it's just me. I just feel that works a little bit better. That just having that line taking you to that corner. And what I said earlier about that notion of diagonals, if you can get the diagonal going, lining up with one of the corners, it just always feels that little bit more. It feels stronger. So you see, just moving that bowl a little bit. Anyway, but yes, that works better than doing a longer crop. So thank you for sending that one in, Diana, much appreciated. Right. Oh, Diana says she did remove the spots in one edit but couldn't download it. Yeah, you do something and then suddenly things don't work as you're wanting them to. It's always frustrating, that. Right, okay, where are we at? Now, hold on. I seem to have... Oh, have I lost my folder? No, episode 49. There we go. That's what I was looking for. So, how far through are we? We're a little over. We're about halfway through. It's about this is turning into a longer one. Right. Okay. Might need to try and speed up a little bit. Now we are over halfway through, I think. So next up, we've got Marie from South Africa. And so, try and find Marie's picture. Now, Marie was having a lot of fun, getting quite complex with this image. And so Marie says, "Hi Kim, this is my entry into the challenge. I broke a few glasses in this attempt." There's dedication for you. The backdrop was a white perspex sheet with a strobe behind it. So she's got the light behind a white perspex sheet, and then there are black cards on either side of the glasses. And what the black card does is it gives these black rims to the reflection. So we've got this white light coming through from behind, so it's backlit, but you've got these black edges on the edges of the stems and the flutes of the glasses. And that's created by, just outside of the image, you've got pieces of black card. So that's what's sort of creating the reflection there. Taped the wire to the glass as well taped the twisted wire to the glasses as well to stabilise them. I could not get hold of acrylic ice cubes to put on in the top glass, so I used soda water with regular ice instead. And this is to show it is actually two glasses and not a reflection, all to fool the eyes. Yes, because I think the first thing you look at that and you immediately think, oh, it's a reflection. Then you notice that the glass below doesn't have the soda water and ice cubes in the top. So the next thought is, oh, it's probably quickly knocked together in Photoshop, but it wasn't. Marie has actually set all this up. She's balanced glasses on top of each other, broken a few glasses in the process, but has actually, and then tied it up in Photoshop, getting rid of bits of tape and a third glass which they were balanced on. Photo taken in a blacked out room with no other light source. So yeah, a seriously complex shot to set up that. Lots of white space around it. Again, I think it's a kind of strange mix of, in some ways it's very minimalistic, and in other ways it's quite complex as well. You could stretch this out a bit. You could maybe take it as far as making it square and giving a little bit more space on the right. But I did try playing around with this earlier, and in the end kind of ended up coming back to the same crop you've done there as well. So But the thing is here really is that I would say this is more one of those where I would talk about negative space, I think, as being the more dominant part than the minimalism, because there's quite a lot going on in it. It's not as minimalistic, but it does have a lot of negative space, and that negative space is really what's helping to define the shapes of the glass and the wire. So, and I love that little squiggle with the wire, rather nice that. So thank you for sending that one in, Marie. Really interesting photo. Thank you for letting me know how you set it up as well, because a lot of work went into that. Okay. So comments we have here. All right. Okay. So Diana said she agrees about the diagonal with her bowl. VG likes the lines circling the bowl. And Sandra liked the reflections of the bowl, as did Rosie. Now, onto your picture, Marie. Russ says, lovely image, very dramatic. VG says, initially I thought it was a reflection. Yep, I think it is the first thought, is a reflection, and you realise it isn't. Rosie says, very clever shot, the lighting is great, you have inspired me to have a go. Well, there you go, Marie. You're inspiring Rosie, so that's fantastic. And Russ says, ditto Rosie. So Russ is also feeling inspired to give it a go. And Sandra says, thanks for sharing the complex setup. Really interesting that it wasn't created in Photoshop. It is. It's kind of one of those things that, on the one hand, there's a lot of things we can do in Photoshop, which make it a bit easier, perhaps. But we're not necessarily doing photography because it's easy. We're doing photography because of the challenge. We're doing photography because it stretches us. We're doing it because we want to try something out, because we're obsessed. We are obsessed. If we weren't obsessed, you wouldn't be sitting here for a couple of hours every week watching me. I wouldn't be sitting here doing these podcasts. There are millions of people, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people out there taking photos every single day using their phones. But then there are those of us who are obsessed with it. We're slightly different. We will go to lengths that your quick phone photographer won't. So whether that's staking out in a garden shed for 6 hours, I think it was, Rosie, you said, trying to get photos of the garden birds, or camping out at the top of mountains to get a sunrise, or going through several glasses and bits of tape and desperately trying to create something to see if you can do it in camera rather than a Photoshop copy. So yeah, I love that. Thanks very much. So next up, we have somebody else from South Africa also playing with glass in a different way. Is Jackie's photo. And I think Jackie has probably also done a similar kind of perspex sheet background light coming through setup. So Jackie says the still life she prefers doing mostly involves glass and experimenting with different ways in order to present the subject, and that's why she's chosen this image. Trying to do something different, I put the glass on its side with a few drops of red wine in it, so your eye immediately gets drawn down and away from the rest of the image towards the spilt wine, thus causing the minimalist effect. The image is stripped down to a minimum, but I also feel tends to incorporate a feeling of negative space with the plain white background, as without it the subject wouldn't be such a focal point. It's also placed on a mirror, so there's a slight reflection, and the line in the background was left in deliberately so as not to give the glass a floating in the middle of nowhere effect. So, different kind of feel to, but even though we're talking white backgrounds, we're talking wine glasses, we're talking minimalism, you can see that this photo that Jackie's done is very, very, very different to the photo that Marie did. And I love that. I love the fact that you can apparently take the same objects and yet set about interpreting in such totally different ways. So with this one, Jackie's left the horizon line in it, because then it does have this feel of being on a table, even though it's only very slight. And the little red drops, it's funny, I mean, it almost like selective colour, because everything else feels, because there is no other colour, your eye gets drawn straight to the colour of the red wine. And of course, also those kind of can almost be blood, which might have come from breaking too many glasses as well. So lovely shot, Jackie. And yeah, I love the fact that both Jackie and Marie have done very different shots with wine glasses, perspex, in studio setup lighting, and totally and utterly different interpretations. So yeah, brilliant that. So thank you again for that. So what else we got? Yeah, so Sandra said about creating it. Well, Maggie says beautiful madness. Yes. Yeah. Marie says, yeah, all my pleasure. Please do try and buy enough glasses. Yes, you don't do it if you've only got 2 glasses, and don't do it if you if they're your good glasses and you can't get hold of any more. April says, lol, that's true, Kim. I'm presuming that's about the obsession. Okay, so on to Jackie's. VG says, Jackie, lovely. Rosie says, I find the red wine very eye-catching. I think I would like to see more of the reflection, but love the shot. Marie says, great shot, Jackie. Sandra says, another amazing image. Does anyone know where you can get a perspex sheet? Jill also thought the same thing about the red, and April loves both shots. This piece of classic minimalism. So yes, I think that could have been quite interesting, Jackie, if you had maybe had more of the reflection of the glass. But yes, you're right, that would have changed the feel of it as well. So with all these things, there's how you decide to call it. Listen to what other people have said, and sometimes you think, oh, yes, actually I'll try that, and I think that works better. And sometimes you listen to it and you go, it's a nice idea, I tried it, but actually I prefer the way I did it. And in the end, it's your shot, so you do it the way you want to. But yes, would have been interesting. I think yes, I'd quite like to see what the reflection would look like. I don't know whether it would make it any better or not, but I do like that partial reflection that you've got. And in the end, really, it's also about the wine, the red drops of wine. So maybe if you had too much of a reflection, that would sort of start detracting from the red drops of wine. Yeah. Lots of ways to play, lots of ways to interpret. I love it. I love that about photography. Marie says, sheets at the builders' warehouses or DIY stores, you can buy the sheets of perspex. And Cheryl. Hello, Cheryl. Has come in to reply to Sandra. Says you can get them on eBay. Cool. Excellent. Right. Okay. On to the next one. So Becca. Now Becca sent me about 4 photos. I'm only going to show 2. But Becca had said, after watching your podcast yesterday, so this was obviously simple last week, I realised just how many of my photos capture the minimalist and negative space. So the first one she sent in, the Bishibani bee. Bishibani bee? Bishibani bee. I've not heard them called that before. Brackets, ladybird. So there we have the ladybird on a dog. And taken with the DSLR. And I suppose what you've got here is that speck of red on, again, a bit like Jackie's wine, on what is otherwise an uncoloured background, just sort of leaps out and grabs the attention. I wonder whether it's maybe just a little bit too small. There's a lot of space around it. And again, I'm not going to take it into Photoshop and crop, but if I just zoom in a bit and sort of place it something like that on the screen, do you see that? I think it sort of, then it maybe draws your attention a little bit more. You drag that over a bit, put it in the place where you want it. But I think zoomed out like this, there's a speck of red and you would then have to go in and look at it. But I think if you're sort of a little bit closer in, you can still have that sense of minimalism and space around it, but then you're actually going to notice the ladybird a little bit more. Now the second picture Becca sent in was this one, which said this one she took specifically for this challenge, Made me think about the lack of freedom during lockdown. Or was it that I had the wrong state of mind? Too deep. No, I mean, this is exactly what I was talking about just after we were looking at Lucas's photo. I think, there are times that I think a lot of us are just sort of yearning for a sense of freedom. And the plane with the contrails behind it, shooting upwards into a clear blue sky, does have a real sense of freedom over it. What was interesting was Nuria put up in the comments of this, actually had put up what she said was a very similar picture, but it was turned 90 degrees like that, which changes the feel for it. It's quite strange. That way it feels very directional. You feel like it's heading with purpose off somewhere, whereas this only revolves, I suppose, that way feels like it's crashing towards Earth. That way it's heading in a different direction, and that way, the way you decided to take it feels more like takeoff, really. It's almost like a spaceship heading up for the stars. So maybe it actually has more of a sense of that heading off out into space somewhere. So thanks for sending those ones in. If you're ever stuck for something, just look up. Maybe you can find something in the sky for your minimalism. Right, Jill says, with regard to your ladybird one, I love this partly because of the texture in the wood. April also says, I love the photo with the ladybug and agree cropping it closer makes it look better. And VG says, the ladybug lazy and still, the plane busy. And Inga says, here the centering worked well. Yes, with the plane, I think that's, yes, you want it kind of in the middle like that. Slightly different again, if you were doing it diagonal, you would have an entirely different kind of photo. Right, okay, next up then we're going to go for Anne. Now, what I was kind of interested here was part of the reason for showing that one from Becca beforehand as well was we've gone from these sort of near black and white photos into suddenly bright, vivid colour. And Anne's photo is really bright and vivid. It's just wow, it's just this massive orangey red with light reflecting. It looks like a window reflecting, bouncing light off the side here. And Anne says, this is my photo for the challenge. It was taken in Salina, Texas, and is part of an outside wall of a high school football stadium. I liked the light reflection and the shine of the image. And yeah, I suppose, this is where you're kind of talking minimalism, as it's just, there's not a lot to it other than the stripes and a little bit of reflection. But it doesn't have to be quiet. Nothing says minimalism has to be. It very often is the use of negative space, the use of blacks, the use of whites, minimalism. But this is a very loud minimalism, and it sort of hits the eyeballs. But again, maybe it's because we're in a kind of dreich Scottish winter. I just love that massive colour. So yeah, I love the brightness of this, Anne. So thank you very much for sending that one in. So okay, Becca's saying thanks, and then Maggie goes, wow, this is stunning. Maria says she's lost the sound. I hope that isn't for everybody. Maggie says so beautifully abstract. VG says bright and beautiful. Okay, I'm going to carry on working as though we do have sound. Excuse me. I'm still slightly worried about my audio mixer here, which is continually going into the red. It might well turn out... Oh, VG says we hear you. That's fine. So, okay, so it's just Maria who lost the sound. Yeah, I worry about whether my recording is going to end up sounding distorted. I'm not going to know until after this, when I actually sort of start editing the video ready for YouTube. Oh, well, let's just hope for the best. So, where are we? Right, next up we come to, oh yeah, Russ says all good here, and Roy's sound is okay. Cool, okay, so it was just you, Maria, that was having the problem. Now, next up is VG, and I have to say, I think this is probably my favourite of all the ones that have been sent in. VG says, an old hand pump to fetch water at our backyard. My submission for this week's challenge. And I love this photo. It really does. I think similarly to Anne's bright red photo, this yellow is just so rich, and it sort of reminds me of some of the other colour shots you played with in the past, like the turmeric you had, I think, in the Still Life Challenge, VG. That really rich, vibrant yellow, and occasionally seen it in some of the saris you wear when we've chatted online. And but it's not just, this isn't just a sort of plain yellow. This is really textured, really weathered, and again that the little hand pump, the water, with the rust in it, and that little bit of green paint that's all peeled away and been rusted over. So much texture in here, and yet at the same time so empty, and it's just such a beautiful balance. I love this. I could happily sort of look at this for forever, I think. It's kind of minimalism at its best in a way. It's still, there's I love all the textures in the paintwork. I love all the textures in the rust, but at the same time, it's not overpowering. When we think about Roy's picture with the plant, and it was beautiful having that plant with the shadow, not dissimilar to the little hand pump here, except for the fact that the wall in the background overpowered it because it was too strong, whereas here it doesn't overpower it, and the kind of gradates from this sort of bright on the left getting darker over to the right, but the hand pump is just sort of sits there, and that little curve of the handle. So yes, this one does it for me. Thank you very much for sending that one in, VG. That's just... Now, I'm perfectly content to accept that it might just be me, but I'd love to see what other people think about it. There's already a few colours here. Okay, Marie is scrambling back online. Naria, just love the mustard colour of that wall. Russ says, lovely shot, VG, simple but so effective. Maggie says, this is just glorious, VG, the yellow is joyful. Michelle, yes, again, so simple but very effective. Inga says, stunning. Marie says, stunning in its simpleness. April says, I love this picture for the rustic feeling to it. Sandra says, lovely pump photo. And Russ says, the diagonal of the handle taking you to the top right corner. Yes. And VG says, thanks, Kim, and thank you to everyone else as well. So I think you can allow yourself a smug moment there, VG. If we're handing out smug awards tonight, I think you get the smug award. Rosie says, super shot, VG, well seen. Nicola is also saying, a lovely VG. Now, the other shot I wanted to show you was the second one by VG, which was quite different, which is this one. Another, again, brilliant, vibrant yellow, this time offset by the blues of the windows and the door. But what I also really love about this is VG made this. She actually literally made it out of card and paper and glue and little bits of wood. And so VG says, one more photograph I thought of submitting. At least this was interesting to me. When I googled for minimalistic photography, I came across a photograph which grabbed my attention, which was stairs going up to a door and a window. But since there isn't anywhere around her where which is like this, she actually decided to create the miniature version of it. Took the photo and then just tidied it up a little bit in Photoshop. And I just love this. I absolutely adore the idea that you've got an idea for, because I have seen pictures like this for kind of very simple minimalist wall, steps, door, window. You're not seeing anything else. All the busyness has been taken away. Really powerful. But you know, if you don't happen to live where there's anything like this, what do you do? And so VG literally made it. I think actually, VG, you did send me some of the making photos on WhatsApp. Perhaps maybe if you could, in the group, do it in the comments where you've submitted this picture. If you don't mind, stick in a couple of your making photos so people can actually see, you know, those bits where you're cutting the card and get a sense of the size and scale of it, because I think it's really interesting. So thank you again so I think the second load of Smug points, Smug awards to VG for that as well. So yeah, lots of comments here. Very clever, says Naria. April, love it also, can't believe you made it. Jill, that's brilliant, very convincing. Russ, I love this one too. I would perhaps like a thin slice of yellow to the right of the door. I think that's true. I think that door felt just a little, you need a little bit more room to the right of that door. Okay, VG says she will stick up the images. So if you're, you know, go to the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook page, and at some point in the next day or two, scroll down, find that image that VG put in, and she'll stick into the comments some of the behind the scenes photos of her actually making that scene. Right, okay, so, and Sandra says, what a great idea, I wouldn't have realised. VG's enjoying the Smug Awards. Michelle says, well done VG, lots of little clapping emojis. And Nuria says, teacher's pet. Yes, it's true. Okay, so next up then, we're going to go for Russ. So now Russ sent me 3 different photos. I'm actually going to show all of them, but fairly briefly. But it was basically about the notion of playing around with minimalism. So this one, in response to your talk last week, I thought I'd add a few photos that I feel could possibly fit the brief. The first image is of a piece of seaweed down on the beach in Devon. I thought it was a reasonable example of negative space. While the seaweed is the obvious main subject, there was a lot of information for the viewer contained in the background. So yeah, this is you've got the background, and you can see that it's the beach runs away down to the sea, and then the kind of grey sky beyond. But because it goes out of focus, it's not overpowering. Your eye is automatically drawn back to the seaweed. It's a very kind of simple shape, simple colours, nothing screaming at you or shouting at you. It's a gentle kind of scene. So yeah, that kind of, you know, fits the minimalism in that brief. But what was also interesting with Russ was he sent in another 2 images. Were much more about minimalism and how far you can reduce the level of information on view while still being able to identify the subject. And that, what I thought was a really interesting point, Russ, which is, you know, we talk about in minimalism stripping back and stripping back and stripping back, and how far back can you go before you lose it. So this one becomes it. So we've got the feather, we've got the white feather on the white background. Very high key, there's no real darks in there. The darkest part of that photo is still just kind of medium level grey. And you're kind of right at the edge of this, whereby if it was any lighter you would just lose a bit too much detail. So that's kind of an interesting thing in itself, I think. How far can you take something? How far can you push it before you start losing it? Now his next picture, where you've got the cup and the bowl, I think has gone just over that line. That's gone to a point whereby I'm kind of really screwing up my eyes or zooming in to try and make out what it is I'm seeing. Now that might vary a little bit from screen to screen as well, which is always worth remembering, is that what you see on your screen, we talked about before, isn't necessarily what somebody else is seeing on their screen. So sometimes you can see things which have got more contrast, which aren't so necessarily contrasted on somebody else's screen, and vice versa. So if you are playing at the edges of visibility, you have to understand that not everybody else is necessarily going to see what you're seeing. You would have to have them literally over your shoulder looking on the same screen to be sure that they are. But I thought that was a really good thing, Russ. Thank you very much for sending in those ideas. It is a point of how far do you want to take it before you start losing it. VG says feather is stunning, and Maggie says texture is so atmospheric. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And Maggie also says she likes the ghost effect. Cool. So we're now on to the last image of the evening, which is Robert. Now, what was really interesting about this one from Robert, I felt, was he said, my attempt at minimalism. So let's show you Robert's photo. A concrete cavity. I did see this hole in a concrete parking lot that caught my eye. I remember you saying that the dot would catch the eye, and it sure did. I flipped the image vertically and horizontally to make it stand out as a little off. So basically, he's trying to create something which is, the fact that it's upside down kind of plays with your mind a little bit more, that it doesn't quite look right. And in fact, if I just turn that way, you'll see that it actually then looks a bit more the right way up. But that wasn't what Robert was trying to do. He was trying to deliberately play with your head a little bit. The question is it enough to hold your attention? Yes, it's a dot. Yes, it has that kind of, like the light dot in the dark part, or the dark dot in the light part of the kind of yin yang, that if you've got this sort of fairly empty space, then you have a little dot, is the dot that grabs the attention. And yes, it's grabbed the attention. But is there enough in that dot to hold the attention? And I'm not totally sure that there is with this. No. It grabbed your attention. And what you did was you wonderfully sent me the original image for this. And what I want to do is show people the original, because actually I have to say I prefer this image. I really quite like this image. This image does it for me much, much more. We've got the dot, and absolutely that's grabbing the attention. But now this line that runs up here over on the right kind of comes into play, and I really like that crack in the paving. And then we've got these little light streaks, like reflected. Presumably there's sunlight which is reflecting off a building or a window somewhere and sort of bouncing back into it. And rather than having it in hard black and white and just a little dot there, there's a warmth on the paving, and there's a warmth in there, and there's more texture, and there's more, I think, for the eye to explore. It still is very, very minimalist, but there's more to it. I think there's more that you can feel. There's more to explore with it, and yeah. So I think sometimes we run the risk, and it's one of the, to go right back to what I said at the beginning, where are you going with minimalism? There's this sort of sense with minimalism that there's a range within which you sort of start, you've got complex photos, you've got lots of stuff in it, loads to look at, lots to draw your attention. And then you have an idea of, let's strip it back, let's take it away, let's take away from, remove anything that's unnecessary, and how far can you take it down? And you start at that point, you're using minimalism as an idea, even if you haven't quite got there yet. Even if the picture is still fairly busy, you've still stripped out a lot of the unnecessaries. And then you move further, and there comes a point where you definitely start moving into what we think of as minimalism, with lots of negative space, but a single idea or object or something which grabs your attention, which gives you that mood, that feeling, that narrative that you're wanting to try and express. And then it gets simpler and simpler and simpler, and then you can get down to a point whereby you cross out of minimalism into there's not now enough to actually hold my attention. That it's just a picture of a bit of sky, a blank wall, and there isn't enough in it on itself to do it. I mean, that picture of VG's, you could get some lovely texture if you just took a chunk of that yellow wall, but in itself it isn't enough. It's the little hand pump which adds everything to the texture of the wall, and that texture of the wall adds everything to the pump. And I think that's the real key with minimalism, and it's particularly the use of negative space, is how much the space is contributing to and enhancing the narrative. And either it's enhancing the narrative or it's detracting from the narrative. And too much or too little. And likewise, the subject, is the subject being swamped by it? Is it not good enough space around it? Or is the subject itself just not enough to hold your attention? I think a little hole in the concrete, it's grabbed your attention for a moment, but it's not necessarily enough to hold your attention. But when you go to the point whereby actually you allow the crack to explore and you allow that little bit of texture of the sun to sort of kind of pour over it, I think you then end up with a little bit more interest in it. So that was the last of the photos. Let's see what we've got in terms of comments. A few comments. Sort of running back. Okay, so where have we got to? So Sandra says, the feather was lovely and good to see 3 different levels of minimalism. Yes, so that was really useful, Russ. I appreciate you sending those ones in. Russ says, good point about difference in screen resolution and brightness. Ben says, I wonder if you need 2 dots so there's a relation between them. And this is now on to Robert's thing. Or even 3 if you're feeling extravagant. Oh, careful, we may be moving out of minimalism there. Maggie says, it's very strange that upside down image is making me feel unsettled. That's interesting, yes. Inga's agreeing with Ben, and Tara Marie says, I do so as well. Oh, Tara, welcome. You didn't say hello earlier. I didn't realise you were watching. Lovely, glad you could make it. Roy says, I prefer the original too. April says that the crack does make it look better. Yeah, I think Ben's point of having something else to relate the dot to, and I think the crack allows you to relate that in that sense in the original. Robert says, in retrospect, I think I like the original as well. That's pretty much what caught my eye in the first place. Okay, I mean, that's a good point. You can see something and you go, yeah, I like that. And then you get back to edit it and then you kind of maybe have a few doubts and then you maybe think, well, what else could I do with it? Let's flip it, let's turn it, let's put it in black and white, let's play with the contrast a bit. And actually, you can end up losing the very thing that grabbed your attention in the first place. So, yeah, it's a good point, that. Maggie says, I like the turned one. I think I can make more of the abstraction. Ben says, in the full image, the crack is something for the dot to relate to. Yes, that's right. That's what we should. And VG says, I thought at first it was a housefly. Yes, rotating works well. The crack is interesting. And then Robert's replying to Ben saying that's a good point. So that's us. Amazing. We made it through in less than 2 hours, which is something of a record for the challenges, I think. Thank you ever so much for everybody who's joined in, everybody who sent in an image, everybody who's taken the time to comment as well. It's been a lot of fun over the last couple of weeks. For anybody who's sort of only just joined now, hasn't had the chance, if you go and check out last week's podcast, episode 48, I do a section, the first section of it is about the use of negative space and minimalism. So that was the talk into it to allow them to set the challenge. I think it's one of these things, like I said last week, it's a tool in your toolbox. Not all photos need negative space, not all photos need minimalism, but sometimes it just works beautifully. And I think the more you understand it, the more you play with it, the better more you deepen your understanding of the use of minimalism and negative space. Then there will come a time when, now's the time I can use it. You go out and it is a foggy day. How to maximize the use of it being a foggy day? Or you see a wall. how can you maximize? You love the texture on it, but how can you really make the most of it? And I think the more you do it, the more proficient you become with it, the more your eye becomes attuned to it, and the more interesting your photos are going to become. So thank you very much, everyone. If you found this interesting, if you would like to support, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Always appreciated. Next week, I haven't yet figured out what I'm going to talk about next week, but if you haven't done so already, join the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook page, and I'll put together an event page in the next few days once I've decided what that's going to be. Look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. And if you came in late and would like to catch up on these, you can either start rewatching it again on Facebook as soon as this finishes, or by tomorrow afternoon I will have it up on YouTube. So, thank you very much. Good night. See you next Tuesday. And end screen. Bye-bye.